my parents and sister announced in a clipped tone. We're leaving for Europe tomorrow. Stay home, finish having the baby, and get out of here. Before I could react, my sister shoved me into the basement and slammed the door behind me. Days later, when they returned, they noticed a dark red liquid seeping under the basement door. I stood there frozen, my mind reeling as my mother's face went pale. The Boston winter was relentlessly cold as snow drifted silently outside. There, in the living room of my childhood home, I sat alone by the fireplace. I never expected to return under such conditions. "Rebecca, dinner's ready," called my mother, Eleanor, from the kitchen. Her voice was warm but carried a hint of annoyance. "I'm coming," I replied, rising slowly and unconsciously resting my hand on my abdomen. It had only been 2 weeks since I'd found out I was pregnant. Morning sickness and fatigue had battered me, leaving me mentally and physically drained. 3 months after David and I separated, my world had turned upside down. In the dining room, my father, Walter, was already absorbed in a newspaper. After a long career as a bank manager, he now enjoyed his retirement on a modest pension. When I sat down and tried to initiate conversation, his only response was a quiet nod. My sister Samantha, typically the lively chatterbox, took the last seat. Since I'd come back, however, she had grown unusually silent. Finally, breaking the quiet, she said, "I was swamped with client meetings today." A marketing professional with a flair for sharing exciting work stories, she casually mentioned a new, massive project on the horizon. Eleanor smiled, setting a large salad bowl on the table. "You always work so hard, Rebecca." I ate in silence. I'd once built my career at an accounting firm, a badge of honor in our family, but after marrying David, I shifted to part-time work to focus on home life. Now, separated, pregnant, and working temporary gigs, my life had taken an unexpected detour. I even started a YouTube channel sharing Reddit stories, earning a surprising $10,000 a month without showing my face or voice. Check the description link if you're curious. Living back with my parents, nothing was going according to plan. Breaking the silence, my father asked, "Have you heard from David?" I paused before answering. "Yes, a bit, but nothing's settled." His calm tone belied the sharpness in his eyes. "Are you thinking about divorce?" he pressed. "I don't know," I admitted softly. Before the conversation could continue, Eleanor interjected, "We need to talk later. But have you told him about the baby?" I whispered, "Not yet. I'm waiting for the right moment." Heavy silence descended, and I felt their expectant stares, judging and waiting. Samantha suddenly blurted out, "Are you really planning to keep the baby?" I stared at her, surprised. "Of course. Why else?" I replied evenly. "Isn't it impossible to raise a child on your own? What about your job and money?" Her voice trailed off before I found my words again. "Nothing," I answered, trying to sound firm. Eleanor quickly soothed. "We're just concerned. We want you to do what's best." I nodded, feeling overwhelmed by the weight of my situation. Divorce, pregnancy, and strained family ties had drained every bit of energy from me. Later that evening, as everyone gathered in the living room, my father cleared his throat loudly. "Everyone listen up. We're leaving for Europe the day after tomorrow." I blinked in disbelief. "Europe? Why the sudden trip?" I managed to ask. Eleanor explained. "We've been planning this for 2 months. We're touring Paris, Rome, and Barcelona." Excitedly, Samantha added, "I even took time off for a family vacation." I was baffled. No one had mentioned any trip since I'd arrived home. Tentatively, I asked, "Should I come too?" The room fell silent for a heartbeat before Eleanor replied, "You're not feeling well, dear. Given your condition, it's best you rest at home." Reluctantly, I agreed. I was weak, and I needed time to sort through my thoughts, yet I couldn't shake the feeling of exclusion. The next morning, I sat alone at the kitchen table while the house bustled with activity. I heard suitcases rattling down the hall, the hum of the hairdryer, and Eleanor issuing hushed commands. I took a single bite of toast, disliking the bland flavor that matched my mood. The relentless morning sickness was at its peak. A sip of warm herbal tea soothed my stomach slightly, but nothing could lift my loneliness. "Good morning, Rebecca," Samantha said as she entered the kitchen. Dressed in fitted jeans and a crisp white blouse, her hair was perfectly styled, a stark contrast to my disheveled pajamas. "Good morning," I smiled weakly. "Looks like you're all set for the trip." "I'm off to find my exercise shoes," she replied, grabbing a glass of orange juice from the fridge. "I'm excited to jog along the Sun River in Paris." "That sounds wonderful," I murmured, letting out a small sigh. Once I was active too. I'd met David while training for a half marathon. Running side by side, we'd fallen in love. Now that felt like a distant memory. "Is there anything you'd like me to bring back?" Samantha suddenly asked. her tone soft with genuine concern. "Nothing in particular, but thanks," I replied. "I see. I've got a few last-minute errands to run." After she left, quiet settled back in the kitchen. I gazed out the window at the clear winter sky, imagining the warmth of Europe and feeling even more isolated. Throughout the day, my parents and Samantha hustled with their travel arrangements, barely speaking to me. I passed the time reading in my room and watching the world outside. Occasionally, hushed whispers drifted from the hallway, but whenever I approached, the voices fell silent, leaving me to wonder what secrets they were keeping. That evening, Eleanor's voice echoed from downstairs. "Rebecca, could you answer the door?" Slowly, I descended the stairs. At the door, a delivery person held out a package. "Package for the Williams family," he said. I signed for it and carried the box into the living room. "Mom, there's a package," I announced. There, gathered around, were Eleanor, Walter, and Samantha, looking relaxed after their travel prep. "Oh, that's French wine," Eleanor explained. "A gift for some friends we're meeting." I set the package on the table as she continued. "Dinner's nearly ready. We'll eat in about 10 minutes. At dinner, an unspoken tension filled the room. My parents discussed flight times and post-arrival plans while Samantha occasionally chimed in, checking her smartphone. I ate quietly, barely contributing to the conversation. Midway through dinner, Eleanor spoke up again. "There are a couple of things to go over while we're away." I looked at her expectantly. "First, I've stocked the fridge with plenty of food. Second, I've posted an emergency contact list on the kitchen board. And please, don't touch the wine cellar in the basement, especially those vintage bottles on the back shelf. They're very valuable." I nodded, a bit confused by the instructions. I rarely ventured into the basement anyway. After dinner, as the family settled in the living room, I helped clear up in the kitchen. It was then that I overheard a hushed conversation. "Are you sure this is all right?" Samantha whispered. "We don't have a choice," Eleanor replied softly. I strained to catch every word, but their voices merged into a blur of uncertainty. Unease washed over me, and I retreated to my room. When night fell and everyone had retired to their rooms, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow promised a long day of solitude, a time to reflect on my future, the baby, and my relationship with David. Past midnight, thirst nudged me awake. Quietly, I left my room and headed downstairs for a glass of water. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. "Who's there?" I asked, turning around. It was Samantha, standing just a few feet away. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. "Not really," I admitted. She joined me by the counter for a moment of shared silence. Then her tone shifted, edged with seriousness. "I'm really worried about you," she said. "Worried about this pregnancy? Will you really be okay on your own?" I took a deep breath. "I'll be fine. I'm responsible for my decisions." But Samantha's voice sharpened with irritation. "And how do you plan to raise a child when you haven't even fixed things with David?" Her words stung. My voice grew firmer. "Why are you being so stubborn?" I asked, trying to defend myself. Without warning, Samantha's voice rose. "Just have the baby and get out of our lives." I froze at her harsh words. For a moment, her expression wavered, but then her determination returned. "Come with me," she ordered, grabbing my arm and pulling me forcefully. "What are you doing?" "Let go." I protested, but my weakened state made it hard to resist. She dragged me toward the basement door. As we reached the stairs, I struggled desperately, but suddenly felt a shove from behind. I nearly tumbled down the steps, managing only to catch the handrail before collapsing onto the cold basement floor. "Samantha, what are you doing?" I trembled, equal parts terrified and angry. With icy detachment, she sneered. "Good luck with your babysitting." The sound of a key turning echoed through the darkness as she snapped the door shut. I rushed to the door, frantic hands turning the knob again and again, but it wouldn't budge. "Open up. Samantha. Mom." I called out until my voice was hoarse. Outside, the house had fallen into deep silence. For hours in the basement's oppressive darkness, I was trapped in a state of shock, pounding on the door, screaming for help, desperately hoping someone would hear me. But they had left me behind, setting off on their trip without a backward glance. As her eyes slowly adjusted to the dim light, Rebecca began to discern the outlines of her surroundings. Near the ceiling, a small window let in a faint glow that she used as her only light source. The basement was far more spacious than she'd realized. Along one wall, rows of Walter's prized wine collection gleamed dully, while the other corners were filled with discarded furniture and old, unused appliances. Tucked away in the back was a cramped bathroom featuring a worn toilet and a tiny sink, barely enough for basic survival. In one corner, a cardboard box revealed a modest cache of bread, bottled water and canned goods. Her family had deliberately left just enough to stave off starvation. Rebecca managed a bitter smile. "What thoughtfulness, why?" she murmured into the darkness. The sudden shift in her family's behavior baffled her, especially Samantha's. Sure, her pregnancy might have been an inconvenient surprise, but did it really warrant this cruel treatment? Over time, Rebecca lost track of the hours. Only the shifting hues of sunrise and sunset through the small window marked the passage of time. Desperation turned to determination as Rebecca tried everything she could to escape. She kicked the door, reached for the high window, and even attempted to hoist herself up on piled furniture, but nothing worked. The door remained solidly locked, and the window was far too high to reach. By the second day, Rebecca realized panic wouldn't help her. She resolved to conserve her strength, for both herself and her unborn baby, and began rationing the food and water. Once she calmed down, new escape ideas started forming in her mind. On the third day, while scrutinizing the shelves behind the wine cellar, Rebecca discovered an old, dust-covered toolbox. Inside, she found a handful of basic tools: screwdrivers, pliers, a hammer. "Maybe I can use these," she whispered, a spark of hope igniting within her. Her plan was to either dismantle the window frame or remove the door hinges. But as she attempted these ideas, she quickly realized the window was embedded in concrete, and the door hinges were securely fixed on the outside. Then on the fourth day, Rebecca made another unsettling discovery: a tattered photo album hidden in a box. Desperate for any distraction from her grim reality, she flipped through its pages. There were old family snapshots, her parents in their youthful days, and pictures of her and Samantha growing up together. But then Rebecca's breath caught as she encountered a recent photo. There on a beach was David, her estranged husband, smiling arm in arm with Samantha. Shock and disbelief flooded her. As she flipped further, more images emerged. David and Samantha dining out, walking hand in hand in parks. All the photos were from the period when David and Rebecca had already begun living apart. It couldn't be. Her heart pounded as bitter thoughts took shape. David and Samantha, her own sister, were together, and it appeared that her parents had not only known about it but accepted it. For David, her unexpected pregnancy would cause inconvenient complications, and for Samantha, the relationship with a man already committed to her sister was a tangled mess she clearly didn't care to address. Overwhelmed by betrayal and deceit, not to mention the shame of her confinement, anger slowly rose within Rebecca. Sitting alone on the cold basement floor, she allowed herself a moment of vulnerability before summoning a steely resolve. "I won't give up," she whispered, placing a hand on her swollen belly. "It's okay. We'll get out of here, and we'll confront them with the truth." A plan of revenge began to form in her mind, one that wasn't just about escape. With the tools from the toolbox and the invaluable wine collection looming in the background, she would force her family to face the consequences of their lies. Rebecca carefully selected a bottle of wine, its label reading 1978 Bordeaux, the very bottle her father had prized for a special occasion. "The special day has come, Dad," she murmured with cold determination as she opened it and poured the deep red liquid into a glass container. The wine looked almost like blood, a fitting symbol for what was about to unfold. Patiently, she refined her plan. Using the pliers, she managed to widen the gap under the door just enough for the wine to seep out slowly. When her family returned, the first thing they would see would be this blood-like liquid, trickling out, a portent of what was to come. Next, she gathered the photographic evidence from the album, photos unmistakably proving David and Samantha's betrayal. With these in hand, she would expose their secret once and for all. The final chilling part of her plan was her own performance. When they finally opened the basement door in panic, she would greet them with an eerie, calm smile. The psychological shock would be monumental. With her family's return looming the next day, Rebecca prepared meticulously. She opened several of Walter's most treasured vintage bottles, combining their contents into a large bowl. "I'm sorry, Dad," she murmured softly. "I never intended to see your precious collection used like this." There was no trace of fear in her tone, only calculated resolve. Later that night, under the oppressive silence of confinement, she used the pliers once more to further widen the gap beneath the door until the wood splintered just enough. Then she waited in the darkness. The next morning, the rumble of a car engine signaled their return. Heart pounding but composed, Rebecca picked up the bowl and approached the door. Slowly, deliberately, she poured the dark red liquid along the threshold. The crimson wine flowed across the floor, down the stairs and beyond the door, mimicking blood. From upstairs, she could hear the clatter of unloading luggage and hushed, panicked voices. Suddenly, a terrified scream shattered the tense atmosphere. What is this?" Eleanor's voice echoed, panic evident. "Walter, come quickly." Her scream reverberated, and heavy footsteps thundered down the stairs. What happened? Walter shouted urgently. Rebecca strained to listen from the shadows as she continued pouring, her bowl nearing empty. A cold satisfaction simmered within her as she anticipated their inevitable reaction. A manifestation of guilt and fear that would leave them questioning everything. Blood from the basement. Eleanor's voice trembled while Samantha and Walter scrambled. Walter even called, "Call 911. Amid the chaos, Rebecca finished pouring the remaining wine and placed the bowl down with deliberate calmness. Then she stepped to the center of the basement, standing resolute and waiting. In an abrupt moment, the sound of a key turning and the forceful swing of the door broke the silence. Blinding light flooded in as Walter entered, his face ashen, a gun clutched in his hand. "Rebecca!" he gasped in disbelief. A slight smile curled on her lips. "Welcome back, Dad," she greeted coolly. Eleanor peered from behind Walter, her expression a mix of fear and relief. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. "Yes, just a bit thirsty," Rebecca replied evenly, her eyes catching Walter's gaze as it fell upon the spreading stain of wine on the floor. "This is your precious vintage wine, Dad, the one you were saving for a special occasion." At that moment, Samantha rushed down the stairs. I called the police," she stammered near the basement door. "Hello, Samantha," Rebecca said with a subtle edge in her tone. "Did you enjoy your little trip?" A heavy silence descended over the room as Walter slowly lowered his gun, exchanging confused glances with Eleanor. "Let's go upstairs," Rebecca finally declared, breaking the hush. "We have a lot to discuss." Later, in the living room, the atmosphere was charged with a mix of fear and guilt. Seated on the sofa, Rebecca fixed her gaze on her family. They, in turn, looked back at her with a blend of terror and remorse. "Why?" Rebecca demanded bluntly. Eleanor attempted to speak, but Samantha interrupted sharply. "Because you were in the way." Eleanor tried to interject, but Samantha's emotions overran her. "It doesn't matter. We can't hide anymore." Turning directly to Rebecca, Samantha continued, "You ruined everything. David and I were happy." Rebecca's composure faltered, her heart pounding as she said, "David and you?" Samantha stood, her tone defensive. "Yes, David and I have been together for over a year now, ever since you became a burden." Walter's low, steady voice attempted to calm the rising tide. "No, Rebecca." But Rebecca urged, "Let her finish. I want to hear everything." Samantha scoffed bitterly. "What do you want to know? How miserable David was living with you. How happy he is with me." A cold clarity filled Rebecca's tone. "I found the photos in the basement," she stated plainly. For a moment, shock flickered across Samantha's face. "So you pretended to be on a trip, but you were really with David?" Rebecca observed their reactions closely. Their silence spoke volumes. "So you locked me in the basement because having David's child threatened your happiness?" Eleanor suddenly interjected, her voice laced with feigned regret. "It was for your own good, Rebecca. You can't raise a child on your own. We needed time to figure out another solution." "Another solution?" Rebecca's voice trembled. "What kind of solution? Were you ever planning to let me out?" Before anyone could answer, the front door swung open and a man's voice echoed. "Is anyone home?" Rebecca's blood ran cold. She knew that voice well. It was David's. Entering the living room, he immediately sensed the charged tension. Then, his eyes fell upon Rebecca seated on the sofa. "Rebecca!" His face drained of color. "Why?" "Hello, David," she said coolly. "How was Europe?" David's gaze shifted to Samantha, clearly confused. Samantha hesitated, then murmured. She was supposed to be in the basement, barely above a whisper. "Excuse me, what did you say?" David demanded, shock and hurt mingling in his tone. Standing slowly, Rebecca fixed him with a piercing stare. "I was locked in the basement, David, while you all enjoyed a European vacation," she said with biting irony. David's eyes darted from Samantha to Walter and Eleanor. "Is this true?" he asked in a trembling voice. "It is," Rebecca confirmed, laying several incriminating photos on the table. Undeniable evidence of David and Samantha's betrayal. A thick silence fell as David stared at the pictures before burying his face in his hands. "Why?" Rebecca pressed softly. "Why, David? Why with my own sister?" After a long, painful pause, David slowly lifted his face, tears glistening in his eyes. "At first, it was just a fleeting mistake," he began hesitantly. "You were so wrapped up in work you didn't notice me anymore. Is that really your excuse?" For an affair, Rebecca's voice turned icy. "No, there's no excuse," she said. David's shoulders slumped. "I was wrong," he admitted, then glanced at Samantha. Everything spiraled out of control. We love each other. Samantha's voice cut in, defiant. Let's stop the lies, David. In a pained tone, David asked, Samantha, what about the part where you said locking Rebecca in the basement was our only option? Samantha's eyes blazed as she shouted. Because her pregnancy ruined everything. Pregnancy. David's gaze shifted in shock to Rebecca. You're pregnant. Rebecca nodded slowly. So, David's stare hardened as he looked at Samantha. That's why you locked her in the basement. Walter stepped forward, trying to explain. We never intended to hurt her. We just thought we had to manage the situation. A bitter laugh escaped Rebecca. Manage? You meant to leave me locked in there to starve? No. Eleanor cried, her voice cracking. We never meant to. She faltered, words failing her. Rebecca picked up her mobile phone from the table and asked, Should I call the police? Don't, Samantha blurted, desperate. Please, Rebecca, we're family. Rebecca's laugh was cold. Family doesn't hurt one another. Family doesn't lock each other up. David stepped closer, pleading. Please don't call the police. Let's talk. How can we make amends for locking me out of your life, for taking my husband, for endangering my baby? How can you fix this? An oppressive silence fell as Rebecca scanned their faces. Each reflected fear, regret, and despair. These were exactly the reactions she had been expecting. I've had enough, Rebecca finally declared. I'm leaving this house. I'm starting a new life far away from all of you. Eleanor's voice trembled through her tears. Please forgive us. Rebecca replied quietly. I don't know if I can forgive you yet. But one thing is certain. My child and I can be happy without you. She turned and left the living room for her room, leaving behind the remnants of what had once been her family, her husband, and the bitter taste of betrayal. Later, as she packed her belongings, Rebecca gazed out at the snowy landscape. A new season was about to begin. 6 months later, in a small suburban Boston house bathed in gentle spring sunlight, a bright rectangle of light danced across the living room floor. Rebecca sat in a rocking chair, cradling her 2-week-old daughter. The baby's peaceful, sleeping face warmed her heart. Emma, you're such a strong girl, she murmured, softly kissing her daughter's cheek. Just like your mommy. A gentle knock at the door stirred her. Rebecca rose quietly and opened it to find David standing there with a bouquet and a small gift in his hands. May I come in? He asked tentatively. Without a word, Rebecca stepped aside. Though there was still tension between them, it wasn't as bitter as before. When David entered the living room and saw the sleeping baby, his voice trembled with emotion. She's truly beautiful, he said. Rebecca adjusted her hold on Emma, a girl who was growing into strength and beauty. David sat down on the sofa and with a nervous look said, I'm truly sorry for endangering you and the baby, for betraying you, for everything. Rebecca listened in silence. This wasn't the first time David had apologized. Since that day, he had contacted her repeatedly, insisting that he had completely ended his relationship with Samantha. I want you back, David said, his gaze serious. Won't you give me another chance? Let me be Emma's father, and your husband. Rebecca looked out the window as memories of the past 6 months swirled in her mind. A time in which she had rebuilt her life through a new job, a new home, and new friends. She had proven to herself that she could be strong and independent. It will take time, she finally replied. We can't go back to how things were overnight, but I do think Emma deserves a father. Maybe it's worth trying again. Hope lit up David's face. Thank you, Rebecca. That evening, Rebecca received a phone call from Eleanor. How are you doing? Her mother asked hesitantly. Emma and I are both fine, Rebecca answered briefly. Would you let us see her? Our granddaughter, Eleanor pleaded. After a long pause, Rebecca said softly, Someday, but not yet. I understand, Eleanor replied, her voice mingling resignation with hope. We'll wait. And what about Samantha? How is she? Rebecca's tone was calm. She started living alone in New York. She's been reflecting on everything. There was nothing more to say. Forgiveness, Rebecca thought, takes time, and some wounds never fully heal. That night, as Rebecca sat beside Emma's bed holding her tiny hand, she reflected on the unexpected turns her life had taken. Amidst the pain, she saw the possibility of new happiness. We'll be okay, Emma, she whispered. No matter what happens, we'll live strongly. Outside, the twilight sky deepened to a rich red, heralding the start of a new night, and for Rebecca, a new life had just begun.